Milek carefully brushed her Zephyr-Strider's long silky tail as she looked over the competition. Many species had come from all corners of the galaxy this year, each bringing along the finest examples that their homeworlds had to offer. Of course, she thought her Strider was the best of the bunch, though she had to admit she had some bias in the evaluation. Her Strider gently snorted in pleasure as the comb passed for its fine coat, before nudging Milek for a treat. She handed over a bundle of green vegetables to the willing animal, which happily munched while enjoying the grooming session.
"That's a fine Zephyr Strider you have this year," a voice said from the next stall over.
Looking over, Milek saw Fessin. He was a large Ominion that served as her foil most years at the Intragalactic Pet and Garden Show, or IPGS, as regulars like to call it. The two would routinely swap victories with one another. Eyeing Fessin's latest entry, a gunluck with an unusually long facial appendage and rich lavender skin, Milek smirked. "I see you went with size over substance this year, Fessin."
"Only a Zillin would confuse size with substance, especially one bringing along a walking carpet," Fessin replied, voice friendly despite the contents of the words. Neither of the two had any animosity to one another. Milek greatly enjoyed her rival's entries, as he brought along unusual creatures from his world. No matter who won this day, and Milek was certain it would be one of the two again this year, they would go out and have a few drinks and catch each other up on their families. Fessin was using two of his hands to massage oil into the gunluck's skin, while he held a tablet in his other two. "Did you see we have a new species entering this year?"
"No," Milek replied, setting her comb down to the chagrin of the Strider. She was jealous of Fessin's extra pair of appendages. 4 was better than 2. Let me take a look. Taking her own tablet, she scanned the entry list. There, near the end, was an unusual name. Human. It was a species that was discovered in an unusual sector of the galaxy. The human's home star system was on the more intense side of habitable for intelligent species, pushing the boundaries of what scientists considered livable. Brighter than nearly 85% of all the stars in the galaxy, their home star, called Sol, was at the upper bound of effective heat before the system would become too hostile and too unstable. As such, along with his active heliosphere, it had gone unnoticed until earlier in the year, when a human exploration craft found its way to a nearby star system and bumped into a long-haul freighter. Because of how recent the species entered the galactic community, little was known about them. All they had was the species survey that was sent to the Galactic Council for any new species that discovers faster-than-light travel. It was a marvel one of their members even became aware of the IPGS. Fessin belted out a long laugh.
"You need to check out their survey. It's a riot."
Milek loaded the council's site and looked up the human submission. The document read like a bad holofiction. "Wow, and I thought we Zillion were insecure. We told the council we secreted a venom that made us poisonous to eat," Milek chuckled as she read the document. Fessin also laughed uproariously.
"And we Ominions claimed our exterior was a hard shell that shattered upon biting, leading to lacerations in the mouth. Little did we know that none of the species that develop intelligence are predatory."
The pair shared in the mirth of their terror in meeting new species for the first time. Every species went through the same process. They'd all find out they weren't alone in the galaxy, become afraid, then lie on the survey to scare off potential threats. It was a time-honored tradition that every species went through, along with the friendly mockery that came with it, after they discovered that nothing out in space was going to eat them. These humans, though? They must be unusually weak and timid among the intelligent species. Instead of just 1 or maybe 2 fate defensive measures, the humans created a litany of absurdities. "Look at this," Milek snorted. "The humans listed their home gravity as triple the highest ever recorded. The figure is so high that the only way they could have passed the first space travel filter would be to load up an immense quantity of explosives into a pile and detonate it while sitting on it. No one is that insane.
This is another good one, Fessin added. They claim here to be able to run for such distances that they consider the longest recorded run at the Pangalactic Games a gentle stroll.
The list of inane claims went on, ranging from claiming the ability to launch projectiles by hand, a species capable of crushing the bones and organs of every intelligent species in the galaxy, all the way to claiming they ate meat. Meat! Everyone knows predators never develop complex social structures. They're just too violent.
This is too much, Millet guffawed.
They're trying to scare us off, saying they routinely fight each other with weapons so wild that it would make speculative fiction writers blush.
Right, Fessin added. The only thing I can believe out of any of this is that they're tiny. They average half my height. No one would lie about being that small, yet they simultaneously claim that the young children can routinely lift masses greater than our most accomplished powerlifters.
We'll be lucky then, Millet stated. We get to see one in person here, assuming his arrival isn't also a fabrication. The pair quickly moved on from the poor storytelling that the humans concocted, and made small talk about the other competitors. The two, while intrigued by the other entrants in their pens, knew they'd be the top pair this year.
Oh, I think our human has arrived,
Fessin commented, gesturing towards the registration desk visible beyond the doorway to the pens. Beyond it, a small bipedal creature was standing before the table. One thing the pair noted was the humans didn't fabricate their size. The human, Millet noted, was male based on the notes in the survey, was so small that the registration desk was level with his chin. The human had to extend his ambulatory propulsion extremity to give him enough boost to reach the registry form.
What is he wearing?
Fessin asked, as he regarded the new species. Similar conversations were happening all over the room, as every entrant present was enamored by the new arrival. I'll check, Millet said, as she lifted her tablet and pointed it in the direction of the human. The device captured his image and, after Millet mentally requested the information, began analyzing the garments. Thankfully, the humans had made enough cultural data available that the system was able to answer their questions. The human was wearing layered garments on his upper body. The first layer against his skin, a white cloth, was called a button-down shirt. She couldn't see the button since it was overlaid by a second layer, a covering designed in grey with rhombus shapes in the cloth, called a wool sweater vest. The lower extremities were tan leggings, referred to as khaki chinos, held up by a darker brown belt around the central point of the human's body. The lower ambulatory extremities were concealed by a garment called Oxfords. Everything about the outfit felt non-threatening and almost silly to Millet and Fessin. They knew from this initial glance that the humans had wildly over-exaggerated the threat they presented to the galaxy. There would be many fun times to be had with future human friends over this. Strangely, though, the receptionist, a male Ipinen, appeared frozen in fear. The pair wondered why this was. Then the human rotated his head and peered through the door. Millet and Fessin both gasped in tandem. The human had front-facing eyes. This was something that no other species in the galactic community possessed, and was a common hallmark of predatory species around the galaxy. Millet calmed when she looked closer, and noticed a device perched on the human's nose. The device held a pair of vision-correcting lenses that the human peered through. Noticing the human's weakened eyesight, she realized that the eye placement must be some form of adaptive camouflage to dissuade predation.
I don't see why they needed to lie when all they had to do was post a visual of their faces, Fessin commented.
Millet nodded in agreement. That's true. One look at those eyes and that would be enough to scare off most threats. Still, that didn't explain the opinion's abject terror, something the human was oblivious to. Which was fair, since the humans were still new to the galactic community, and couldn't know the nuances of each of the member species. The human held in one of its 5-digit hands a rope of some sort that loosely stretched out of view through the door. Anticipation rose in Milek and Fessin when they noticed the rope. This was going to be the human's entrant in the IPGS. After completing the form, the opinion rigidly pointed into the pens area. The human entered the room, and what followed caused every species present, Milek and Fessin included, to freeze up in panic. Attached to the other end of the rope was a vicious predatory creature. While smaller than the human, the animal's back reached the level of the human's knees. The quadrupedal animal oozed predatory vibes. Its fur coat was a mixture of whites and tans, colors that would have made it difficult to identify in arid environments. Long ears hung down from the sides of its head, indicating it had a powerful sense of hearing. A long snout with a black nose showed off the terror of its scent senses. This creature could hear and smell its prey, making it difficult, if not impossible, to hide. The worst was the muzzle. Hanging open, it displayed rows upon rows of sharp white teeth as it breathed heavily, tongue hanging to the side. It was mocking the room, showing off what it would use to rend their flesh, and the organ it would use to taste their meat. And the human had it casually attached to a rope. He walked it into the room with little care, and didn't even seem concerned the dangerous animal was walking behind him. "I think we can calm down," Fessin said, suddenly finding his ability to move. "See that object on the animal's neck?" Milek forced her eyes to take in the predator. Around his neck was a red band that was clasped by a silver buckle. Her muscles loosened when she saw it. "Oh, thank goodness. The human isn't insane. He has it contained by a control collar." The pair realized the rope must be the input device to keep the predator sedated. The human was showing off how they managed to survive on their world and keep predators in check. Other species would create complex mazes to protect their homes, or create harmless trap and release systems to relocate dangerous predators. The humans must have found a way to suppress the predator's higher functions. Of course, the Galactic Council would quickly squash this. Mental slavery, even of predator species, was highly frowned upon. The human present would be given a grace pass, since they are ignorant of the wider community's laws and standards. As the realization filtered through the room, everyone calmed, and took this as an opportunity to get an up-close look at the predator, outside of a game preserve. The human's lips curled up, something the notes called a smile, and nodded to the other contestants. Milek noticed the small translation device affixed to his ear, something that he would need while the humans learned Galactic Standard. Quietly, the human went and sat in his own waiting area. Milek noted his strange gait and the strange gait of his captured predator. It looked like they were carefully taking steps, like they didn't want to hit the ground too hard. She wondered why they felt like they were moving in slow motion. Milek also took note of the musculature of the human. Visible under its thin skin, it flexed and moved smoothly. Something in her instincts screamed that maybe the strength claim was not a fabrication. Yet it was moving so slowly that it looked like it was struggling under the gravity on the planet. After more small talk and murmuring around the room, the announcement came over the speakers to relocate to the main competition hall. Everyone filed out in order of their entry numbers to parade their entrance before the crowd. A small warning was sent out that there would be one predatory animal entry, and it was safely contained. This would be necessary for the human's animal when it entered the main hall to avoid a mass freeze. Taking a deep breath, Milek led her strider out into the main hall at the end of the procession. The winner of the prior year's competition always received the honor of leading the line. Exiting a tunnel, Milek took in the massive arena. A long oval, the arena was ringed by display pens for each contestant, and was so large it could hold 500,000 spectators. Sure, compared to the trillions of residents of the galaxy, 500,000 wasn't an impressive number. More popular events could attract billions of viewers on the Hollows. Still, old instincts were present in every species. 500,000 spectators was logically a fringe event. Yet it still felt like a massive crowd to the instinctual mind. Milek's step increased as she and her well-trained strider gracefully pranced into the arena. First impressions were always important in these events. A failed entry could spell doom with the judges. After reaching her station at the end, Milek secured her strider and turned and watched the other entrants as she caught her breath from the long run. Mainly the human. She observed him at the back of the procession as he followed the line. The human and his mind-controlled predator appeared to be struggling. They clumsily moved along the rear of the group like he was having a hard time matching the pace. More niggling instincts said the human was used to moving at a pace far faster than the run the contestants entered at. Yet the way his body moved made her think humans were from a low-gravity world. The steps were slow and methodical, making it a poor showing as he clumsily followed the back of the procession. The animal was trying to high-step his legs in a prance, yet its rhythm was off. This must be because the human was struggling with maintaining its own pace, while sending signals to the predator at the same time. Milek felt bad for the human. It had travelled most of the way across the galaxy to show off his homeworld's animals, just to fight against the gravity and put on a weak showing in the initial phase. Maybe he could recover in the individual event. Milek moved on to the individual phase. Once again, being the winner came with the advantage of going first. Many assumed going last was beneficial, since it would be the most recent performance for the judges. Milek knew better. The crowd would tire, as would the judges over the hours it took to go through all the entries. Milek's display went as well as she could hope. Her strider gracefully galloped around the arena, showing off his beautifully flowing hair. The silky coat streamed behind like flags, and when it ran, the animal's coat sparkled in the arena lights. The clapping was the best she had heard in many years. Confident, Milek watched her friend Fessin throw fruit at his gonlock, which snatched it out of the air and ate. It was an interesting display, and had Milek not brought a strider, would have been good for the win. She was already planning what she would say to her friend after the event, when he held his second-place ribbon. The rest of the entrance went as expected. Various animals were displayed and walked across the yard. Few animals brought were ever sophisticated enough to perform basic tasks, like Fessin's gunluck, or could equal the pure beauty of the strider. Finally, it was the human's turn. Going last, much of the crowd had already filtered out of the arena, and the judges appeared to be tiring. The poor guy would struggle to gain their attention. Strangely, the human left his controlled predator in the pen and began walking around the arena. He placed devices on the ground in various places and returned to his pen. Taking out a tablet of his own, he pressed the surface. Then, the tunnel sprouted out various hard-like constructs. Tunnels, ramps, boards on pivot points, and an array of rods closely placed in a line sprouted up all over the arena. Milek was intrigued by what the human was intending to do. The human led the animal out of the pen and to one end of the arena. Then she froze in panic, as did the judges and the remaining spectators. The human had reached down and released the control collar from the predator. It was now loose. Surprise rose in Milek's mind when the predator didn't immediately rampage and rip the human's throat out. Instead, it stood still on all four of its legs, nose pointed out and mouth closed. It had an intense look in its front-facing eyes, and his muscles flexed. Then the human ran. Its speed and grace was unbelievable. Making a noise, the animal then followed along. Milek was afraid the predator had come to its senses and was aiming to kill the human. Then it didn't. The human would gesture at the different hard-like constructs, and the predator, with a blazing speed even greater than the human's, would run at them. The animal streaked up and down ramps. The creature balanced on the pivoted board and allowed its weight to lower it down the other end, displaying the terrifying intelligence the predator possessed. Its speed was shown off when it bolted into a long, curved tunnel and shot out at the other end. Its agility was presented when it quickly weaved in and out of the closely placed rods. All the while, the human continued to bound at speed across the arena in his sweater vest and Oxford shoes, garments that did not look like they were designed for athletic achievement. Then, after the pair rapidly ran from one end of the arena to the other through the obstacle course, the human ended the display. The animal sat before the human and patiently waited. The human reached into a pocket in the chino pants and retrieved a brown strip. Milek's instincts repulsed when she caught the odor of meat. The human handed the strip to the animal, which ate it and then waited. Horror filled Milek when she realized what had occurred. The human didn't mind control the predator. He had tamed the predator. The human replaced the collar, and, now without the restrictions of the line, far more gracefully led the animal back to their pen, after which he collected his hard light emitters. It took a few minutes for the crowd and judges to regain their senses. After a few more minutes of deliberation, the judges announced they had made a decision. A podium was brought into the arena, and names were announced. As Milek expected, her name was announced as the winner, with Fessin taking second place. Arukin's Fabilsa entered third. While happy with her victory, Milek felt it was unearned. The human had made a display never before seen in galactic history. He had brought a predator, a tamed one at that, and easily displayed it to a crowd. She knew fear and bias kept the judges from voting for his animal. She nudged Fessin. "Join me. I want to talk with the human." Fessin looked nervously over at the human's waiting area. No other contestant or spectator had gone anywhere near his space. Even his neighbors had quickly vacated after the announcement.
"Are you sure? That animal, I don't know. It's terrifying."
Milek agreed. However, she knew something else was more important. "Fessin, we're being rude. This is the human's first experience outside of his home, and we're avoiding him. Come, we need to introduce ourselves and show that the galaxy is a friendly place." Hesitating a moment, the pair gathered their courage and approached the human. The human looked up and bared his teeth at the pair. Milek froze when she saw the teeth. There in his mouth, along with the expected plant molars and cutting incisors, were sharp teeth designed to consume meat. The human quickly put his hand over his mouth to conceal his teeth. "I'm dreadfully sorry. I forgot that showing teeth is considered hostile. Please forgive my breach of decorum. We show teeth on my planet when we're happy." Fessin swallowed hard next to Milek.
"That's fine. We all have our species' body language we have to be careful to control. Accidental offense is common, so we don't take it. I'm Fessin."
"I'm Milek," Milek said, as she tried to fight against the fear that looking at the human's front-facing eyes gave her. She also noticed the human's breathing was steady and slow. He had just made a lengthy run from one end of the arena to the other, and showed no sign of exertion at all. They hadn't lied on the survey about their ability to run distances.
"You can call me Arthur. This was quite the experience.
Petunia here also enjoyed it greatly," he said, bending over and rubbing a hand over the top of the animal's head. The creature's tongue lolled out, and it panted when the hand contacted the fur.
"Can I ask what you call that animal?"
Fessin asked, staring at Arthur, casually contacting a vicious predator.
"Ah, yes. These are what we call dogs. These types of shows are common back on Earth, though we usually only have dogs in them. This particular dog is a breed known as a King Charles Spaniel. Beautiful and graceful they are," Arthur said, as he spoke of the animal like it was a strider. Milek marveled at how controlling these animals was so common, that the humans had pet shows specifically dedicated to them. She also took note of the animal's name. King. Yes, that was appropriate for such a dangerous beast. It was truly a king among predators. Arthur then turned his mouth down. "Sadly, it seems we have quite a bit of stiff competition out here in the galaxy. Big fish, small pond, as they say back home. I had hoped our display would have given a better impression on the judges." Milek didn't want to ruin his impression of the galactic community by telling him the judges were too scared of his king to ever grant it any points, so she gave a smaller lie. "I think it was the entry that caused issue. You seem to be uncoordinated." Arthur balled up one of his appendages and punched it into the other. The loud slap from the immense force scared Milek and Fessin. "Of course! That must have been it. The entry is quite important after all. You see, we didn't properly practice under this gravity." That's important, Fessin said. This planet's gravity is on the heavier side this year. Next year will be on a more average planet.
Arthur's head cocked to the side.
Too heavy? No, sorry, it's quite too light for us. Maybe a third or so of what we're used to. Maybe I'll have to compensate next year by fashioning up a weight vest. That should offset some of the difficulty walking. I'll have to be careful or I'll bounce up in the air like a lunatic.
To demonstrate, Arthur bounded up so high that the bottoms of his Oxford shoes were level with Millet's eyes. He let out a sound that sounded mirthful.
Oh my, this is fun. Reminds me of Holiday on Mars.
More horror came to Millet in that moment. How high Arthur casually leapt in the air made her think that even more of that survey wasn't a cover to scare the galactic community. It was looking to be true. All of it.
So, how long have you managed to tame these dogs? The technology would be valuable on other planets to keep predators in check, Fessin said, as he backed away slightly from Arthur in fear.
Arthur looked down at the animal.
Technology? Oh no, we've been friends for around, 30,000 years, give or take. It was before written history, so we have to estimate based on genetic information and archaeology.
Millet's eyes went wide. These humans had tamed a wild predator before they could even write.
Arthur continued. Humans and dogs, or wolves they came from, are quite compatible. They can run long distances like us. We share complex hunting and social groups. We have strong coordination abilities. It was a perfect match provided by random evolutionary chance.
Millet's worries grew when she started to understand what just stepped onto the galactic stage. A strong, fast, predatory animal with intelligence and social coordination just entered the broader community.
Can we expect you again next year? Millet asked,
lacking anything else to say and not wanting to offend the dangerous human before her.
The human's mouth turned up. Probably not.
Millet and Fessin both felt relief at the statement.
It'll be my wife's turn. She has a wonderful Irish woodhound pup she's working with that will be ready for show next year, Arthur said, in a tone that sounded like pride.
Millet and Fessin turned to look at each other. They knew that they still go, and whatever this Irish wolfhound thing may be, it couldn't be any worse than what they just saw. It was a king, after all. Nothing was scarier than a king. After 5 years, Millet thought she'd be used to this by now. Frozen stiff from fear, she watched the massive brown avian soar through the rafters in the arena. After Arthur brought his King Charles Spaniel, Millet thought she had seen the worst the human's homeworld, a place called Earth, had to offer. The next year, his wife, Emily, showed up with something even more horrifying. When that gigantic beast, easily 5 times larger than the previous one, lumbered into the arena, it caused a wave of fear so intense that a few species even broke out of their freeze instinct and ran. Ran! That's the worst thing to do with a predator. Yet the shaggy grey animal was just as well behaved as the one Arthur brought along. Of course, that is well behaved by human standards. When Emily released a robotic version of a local animal called a deer, the arena was fascinated. Until the massive beast suddenly turned into the vicious predator everyone feared it was. With a simple command from Emily, the gigantic predator immediately began chasing down the robotic deer. The bulky beast herded and maneuvered the robot until it took it down with a nip to the legs. Emily then gave a second command, and the large animal immediately ceased the attack and reverted back to its oddly unassuming demeanor. This was the first time that Millet got a good idea of how dominant the humans were on their world. Screwing up her courage, she and Fessin went to introduce themselves, just like they had with her husband the year prior. She proved just as friendly and oddly apologetic as Arthur. This time, Millet and Fessin were invited to interact with the dog. Millet had a powerful conflict between curiosity and survival brewing at the time. Curiosity won out, barely, and she agreed to meet the predator. The dog, the Irish wolfhound, proved friendly and gentle. The animal had an unusually calm demeanor around potential prey. Yet she knew from the display that aggression could be triggered at any time. Emily explained that they had nothing to worry about, so long as they don't threaten the dog's family. Not that Emily had to worry about that in the galactic community. That was also a controversial year. Like the year before, the judges decided to disregard the performance and award Fessin the first prize while Milek took second. Fessin was so outraged by the bias that he marched off the podium, dragged Emily over, and handed the winning ribbon to her himself. It would have also been the first year that a single entrant won both first and second place with the same animal, since Milek was ready to do the same. When the two most popular entrants in the IPGS rebelled, the judges listened and decided that a technical error in the voting software caused a mix-up. Still, even after learning that Earth's predators could be impressive allies, Milek couldn't shake millions of years of evolutionary instinct. The avian, introduced by the trainer as a golden eagle, peered down over the crowd with eyes that looked like they could see for eternity. The trainer had set up a field of holographic grasses on the floor and let loose a robotic animal, referred to as a hare. The bird circled above, scanning the simulated grass below. Then a subtle shift in the grass gave away the presence of the robotic hare, and the bird went into action. Pulling in its wings, it dove down, picking up speed before flying low to the ground. The hare ran for the bird, flapping to keep up its speed. The eagle skimmed the tips of the holographic grass as it rapidly closed the distance. Then, it extended its long black talons protruding from the ends of its bright yellow reptilian feet, stabbing them into the hare. The hare quickly ceased movement, and the eagle ripped into the robot with a long, sharp beak, puncturing into the compartment that held the animal's reward. After consuming the meat, the bird flapped up into the air with a mighty pump of its wings, before circling back toward the human. The bird then landed on the human's outstretched arm, perching on a thick, protective glove. The human gave a small bow, which the bird mimicked with outstretched wings. The human was wearing an unusual garb made out of animal furs and skins. This was also disturbing to Milek, yet she held her opinion, since it was the traditional cultural garb of a place on Earth called Mongolia, where training of these large predators dated back generations. Milek ended up taking second this year behind the human, with Fessin in the third position. It was 8 years since neither of them ended up on the top of the winner's podium. Still, Milek wasn't upset. The humans bringing in fresh competition improved her game. Even though she placed second, she felt that her presentation was the best it has ever been. The Golden Eagle deserved the win. Humanity had displayed a positively gargantuan avian predator for everyone to see. Milek later learned that, of course, it didn't even rank in the top 10 largest avian predators on Earth. The humans have a penchant for surprises. After the completion of the ceremony, Milek went to Fessin. "Hey, want to go check out the gun displays? It's been a while since we browsed it, and I hear a human finally opened a booth this year."
"That sounds good," Fessin replied. "Maybe their plants are just as unbelievable as their animals."
Both shared a laugh at that. Surely plant life couldn't be hostile and deadly. It was food. The pair moved through an airlock that led to a different part of the competition station. Humans joining the IPGS caused a large number of rapid changes. The biggest change was the venue was moved from rotating planetside arenas to a space station that the IPGS purchased second-hand from a failed concert promoter. They would tow it to the same planets and operate the show in orbit, as opposed to on the ground. The reason for this was twofold. First, the number of spectators had quadrupled since the Irish Wolfhound showing. People wanted to get a better understanding of the fauna of Earth, yet none of the species could survive the crushing gravity of the planet. The IPGS was the perfect place to observe the native wildlife of a planet that was otherwise impossible to visit. The problem was, the arenas the IPGS had on contract weren't large enough for such crowds, and it caused issues with ticket scalping. Second, was also related to the gravity. Because of the high gravity, many of the animals struggled to function properly in normal gravity environments. The two human entrants in the third year reported their animals were distressed when trying to move in the low gravity, and it undermined the performance. One had brought along an animal called a horse, and the gravity was interfering with the animal so badly that the human withdrew before the individual competition. With a station, both problems were addressed. The station was able to handle the far larger crowds, and it could dynamically alter the gravity of the competition floor. Of course, the gravity manipulator had to be special ordered, since no one had designed one to generate that kind of force. Without the proper gravity, the Golden Eagle wouldn't have been able to display his terrifying hunting prowess. A few other changes were made as well. A big one was the use of robotic animals. While Emily introduced the robotic deer, there weren't any rules on the subject, until the other human in the third year created the new rule. Milek thought that human brought along a relatively normal animal to display. It was a creature called a rat. It was a small, dark, grey-haired animal with a long, hairless tail. The human, also, had carted out a large glass container, behind it filled with rocks and artificial plants. The crowd was intrigued by what the rat would do. The human dropped it into the tank, and all the rat did was wander around. Everyone found it disappointing. That is, until it caused the mass fainting. What Milek had initially thought was a large vine suddenly snapped out. The vine opened a mouth and began wrapping around the rat. The rat squealed loudly before it went silent. The vine tightened more and more as the rat struggled in silence before finally expiring. Then the vine twisted around and consumed the rat by swallowing it whole. It turns out that it wasn't a vine, but a long animal the humans refer to as a snake. In particular, a ball python. Which, of course, is also not the largest of that particular class of animal on Earth either. The IPGS promptly banned harming live animals, even before the judges had time to wake up. The fourth year also had a new human-derived rule. That year, a few entrants had shown up. By this point, the IPGS and its regulars had become somewhat used to the bizarre predators that the humans were prone to entering. That year, 3 humans had arrived. One brought the most positively normal animal yet, a colourful avian called a parrot. It wasn't, to Milek's relief, a secret predator that would suck up blood from small cuts in the night. She couldn't imagine such an animal ever existing, though she was sure some human would bring one along at some point. No, the parrot only did something else bizarre. Talking. The second brought along a tiny predator known as a house cat. This was the first time Milek ever saw a predator that she wasn't utterly terrified by upon first glance. It was, dare she say, cute. She loved the way it let out a low, comforting rumble. At least it was until the human dangled a simulated mouse in front of it, and a set of sharp claws deployed. The only solace was the fact the predator was so small, it wouldn't be lethal to the galactic races. It was the third human that caused the rule change, and it was the humans who suggested it, to restrict entry to a list of animals that had to be excluded for safety. It was a long list and, oddly, even included herbivores like an animal called a hippopotamus. Milek also learned in that moment that if the humans are concerned about something, listen. The third human brought along a much larger animal than Milnek initially confused as a bigger house cat. The cat had a coat patterned with orange and black stripes, with a few white accents along the face and underbelly. It was pulled along by a rope, like Arthur and Emily had done with their dogs, by a man with a weird blue coat, in the same stripe pattern as the animal, and had a hairstyle the archives called a mullet. The other 2 humans immediately alerted and informed the IPGS that the third human, along with his animal, which they called a tiger, should be removed from the premises at once. Apparently, even Earth had predators the humans couldn't tame. The immense beast was one of them, and it had a high probability of causing damage. The human with the tiger was eventually ejected, not without a significant amount of argument from the human, claiming he was some sort of tiger royalty. After that was dealt with, Milnek also got her first dose of unusual human humour. When the tiger and its owner finally left, the human with the parrot commented that tigers weren't from some place called Africa. The other replied that it must be two humans in a suit. The two shared a laugh. Then the human with the cat accused the human with the parrot that his parrot was deceased. Milnek was confused why this was funny, because the parrot was very clearly living. Milnek and Fessin stepped through the second airlock into a large atrium. Warm and humid, Milnek flexed her outer chitin and enjoyed the warmth. It reminded her of her homeworld. Looking on the tablet, Milnek found the booth the human had set up. "Looks like it's at the other end of the venue."
"I could use the exercise,"
Fessin said.
"Oh, by the way, I got a message from Arthur. He says if the human offers up something called a pepper, turn it down. Apparently they think it's funny when a new species tries one. Supposedly they cause significant distress both going in and coming out."
"And the humans eat this stuff?" Milnek said, aghast.
Fessin snorted at the absurdity of it. "All the time. Voluntarily."
Milnek shook her head as she and Fessin browsed the garden show. The garden hall was far bigger than the pet show arena. While most of the spectators came for the pet show, they stayed for the food. Milnek looked at the rows upon rows of different stations displaying the local plant life from across the galaxy. Her mouth watered as her eyes scanned over tasty-looking vines, or sumptuous purple flowers. Her 360-degree vision was nearly overloaded by the glorious bounty arrayed in the massive space. Slapping her head, she remembered her mission. She was going to save her credits and appetite to get her first taste of Earth's offerings. Luckily, the humans were omnivores, so they enjoyed plants just as much as a good herbivore did. Milnek and Fessin both struggled as they moved through the garden show. Each new booth tempted them to try their food. Tubers, berries, and nuts galore. Then there was a strange break in the crowd. Looking ahead, Milnek saw the human's booth. It was empty. Moving closer, she saw a bored-looking human sitting on a metal folding chair. The small human, a woman, was dressed in a brown robe with an embroidered garment covering her shoulders in the same colour. Perched upon her head was a brown hat, which had a round brim and had a cone jutting out of the top. The hat looked like it was one size too small for her head, yet still managed to perch on the top. Facing her tablet at the woman, Milnek tried to get an idea of what the apparel was called. Nothing returned. Curiously, the pair approached. Each table held, like many others, an array of amazingly appetizing plants. Vines, purple flowers, red flowers, and more. There was also a section with strange plants that looked like water pitchers, and one that had the weird appearance of having teeth. Milnek noticed that the tables had little signs all over them. For display only, not for consumption. The human looked up and smiled, briefly flashing teeth before her mouth closed. "Welcome to Sprouts. Milnek had a number of questions bouncing around in her mind. The first one popped out. "Can you tell me what your garment is called? I'm not getting anything from the database." The woman looked down at herself. "Oh, this thing? I can understand. It's a pop culture reference I'm a fan of. Those haven't been loaded up to the Galactic Network. It's a big file. This is a robe and hat from a book series about a magical school I enjoy. The character's a herbology teacher which inspired me into becoming a horticulturalist." "Fiction is an important part of development," Milnek agreed. "So why do you have all these signs everywhere?" The human gave a sheepish look. "I misunderstood what a garden show was. I thought it was to show off plants. I didn't think it would be a food court. I can't sell any of those because you may mistakenly eat it." Fessin cocked his head and looked over the plants on display. He laid his eyes on a sumptuous-looking red one.
"Do they just grow too slow to sell? What's wrong with this one? It looks flavorful."
"That one is a rose. They're not particularly difficult to grow. The hips can be consumed. However, take a closer look at that one," the woman said. Fessin leaned in and gasped.
"The thing has teeth on it!"
Milnek leaned in close to see what Fessin was talking about. Sure enough, up and down the stem was a series of little sharp teeth sticking out of it. Those are called thorns, the woman explained. Unless you carefully cut those off, you can shred your insides. They also aren't particularly nutritious. Milek blanched. That was insidious. Why would a plant want to hurt an animal? Presenting segments to eat was an important part of the reproductive cycle. Fersin pointed at a different red flower. And this one? That's a poinsettia. They're toxic and, while not lethal, cause gastrointestinal distress, the woman explained. And this one? Milek asked, pointing at a plant with green leaves growing black-coloured berries. Belladonna. That one is toxic enough to kill you. Milek was happy that the other species couldn't visit Earth. If they did, most of them would be deceased the moment they passed a tantalizing bush outside the spaceport. So you didn't bring anything to eat? Fersin asked bluntly. Oh, I did, the woman replied. Milek smiled. Can we take a look? Sure. Unfortunately, I don't have much. Security wouldn't let me bring most of it on the station, the woman said, as she pulled a wood box out from under one of the tables. Milek knew she would regret asking, but she did anyway. Why couldn't you bring in the food? So, apparently a lot of our food contains harmful substances. In sufficient quantity, they're harmful to us, but it's present in such low quantities, to us anyway, that it's not a big deal. The woman started arranging a number of different items on the table. There was a flat green vegetable with little lumps under the surface, a small box of red berries, and another small box with blue-coloured berries. The woman then took out a tablet and touched it a few times. The picture of a red fruit came on the screen. This, for instance, is an apple. It's a common fruit we enjoy throughout the day. The problem is the seeds contain a substance called arsenic. Humans would have to crush up a large handful of the seeds to have an effect, so we can safely eat the whole thing, including the core, even though that's not common. It is, however, lethal to you guys out here. It's also present in citrus fruit, pears and grapes. She swiped her finger on the screen, and a new picture popped up, this time of a yellow curved tube. This is a banana. They contain potassium, which is important to the human nervous system. They're also mildly radioactive. The woman swiped the screen again. A variety of nuts came up. Milek's mouth watered. She loved nuts. These are various nuts. Almonds contain cyanide, which is a potent lethal compound. It's in small enough quantities that the cultivated ones are safe, though we have to be careful with the wild ones. Even so much as 10 can kill a child. Milek sighed in disappointment that these nuts couldn't be consumed, which only got worse when the woman kept talking. Other kinds of nuts can cause major anaphylactic shock episodes, including a small subset of the human population. They usually have to be careful and read warnings that something may contain nuts. Another picture of a different nut came up, this time with a 2-segment shell. This is called a peanut, though the name is deceptive since it's a different class of plant called a legume. It can also be lethal, so I left them behind. I think I had enough, Milek said. Sad that Earth produced such impressive-looking vegetables, fruit and nuts, that couldn't be consumed. What about these? The woman pointed to the items in turn. The green ones are snow peas, the red ones are raspberries, the blue ones are, creatively, blueberries. They have their own little quirks, so your security didn't trigger them as toxic. Milek and Fersin looked at each other. Even with little quirks that passed security, they wondered if they could risk trying the fare. The woman recognized the look. Hey, I understand your hesitation after that big disclosure. Just because the security guy has cleared it doesn't make you feel comfortable. Fersin sighed. You know what? I think I'll give it a try. It would be rude not to. Maybe the red one. First bite's free, the woman said, holding the box up. Fersin gingerly gripped one of the red berries in his upper left arm and studied it. Milek looked down at the berry that had multiple small bulbous spheres, attached in a rough cone shape, with a hollow center. Taking a deep breath, Fersin popped it into his mouth. His expression then lit up. Wow! This is amazing! The sweetness exploded out of the fruit and is dancing on my tongue! Intrigued, Milek gestured at the green one. The woman handed it up. Biting in, The plant snapped and sent back an unusual sensation. She found the crunchy exterior and soft interior balls a wonderful combination. Snow peas, the woman explained. There's another version called a snap pea that makes a more satisfying pop, though I didn't bring any of those along. The third fruit, the blueberry, was just as incredible. Milek ended up buying a box of the snap peas, while Fessin took a box of raspberries. As they chewed their treats, Milek pointed to a different table. What are those? The woman turned and looked. Ah, those are my carnivorous plants. Milek and Fessin both stopped mid-chew. Did they just hear the human correctly? Carnivorous plants? I think the translator may be acting up, Fessin replied. Did you mean carnival plants? No, carnivorous is right. These plants eat other things, the woman explained, pride in her voice. Milek and Fessin both took a big step away from the table. They were flabbergasted this human casually sat by plants that could reach out and eat her. The woman chuckled. No, not like that. The biggest one out there can eat a rat, and none of them are harmful to larger organisms. They mostly consume smaller insects. Here, have a look. The woman pulled out a different box and extracted a small, wriggling worm thing. Milek looked at it with disgust. They reminded her of her people's larval stage, though it was significantly smaller. Didn't the IPGS ban live demonstrations? The woman paused and looked at the worm. Oh, sorry, yeah, had to get an exception. These things are such low-order life forms that we're not even sure they feel pain. Insects in our world are barely above simple machines. The IPGS gave me an exception for this. That didn't make Milek feel much better. It was like watching the human feed her kids to a plant, which was entirely the opposite of what nature intended. Still, it wasn't her place to question how the biology of another world functioned and watched. The woman first took a small worm and placed it into the open folds of the plant with teeth. It contacted tiny hairs inside, and the outer wall snapped shut, trapping the worm inside. This is a Venus flytrap. They activate when two of the small hairs inside their open mouths are triggered within a close time frame. When closed, they secrete digestive enzymes that consume the trapped insect. They're difficult to grow and require a proper soil acidity to thrive. She extracted a second worm, making Milek feel slightly nauseous. The human then went over to a plant with long stalks that had a series of red hairs sticking out of it. At the end of the red hairs were small clear balls. The woman put the worm in one of the red hairs and released it, leaving it stuck to the plant. The plant then folded in on itself, trapping the worm in a coil. This is commonly called a sundew. The plant sticks to its prey and wraps it up before digesting it and absorbing the nutrients through its wall. The final victim went into the plant shaped like a water jug. The worm fell in, and the top of the jug closed, trapping it within. This is creatively called a pitcher plant. Prey is attracted by a sweet smell and then falls into the interior. Fessin put on a forced smile. That's quite interesting. Earth has a rather unique ecosystem. Unfortunately, we have a few other things to take care of. After buying a few extra boxes of the berries, just to ensure they didn't leave on a bad foot, the pair left. Taking a quick peek back, Fessin blanched. You know, I'm glad Earth's gravity is too high to visit. You have that right, Milek replied. Viewing the plants and animals and the safety of the IPGS is about as much as I can stand. As they went to find some more palatable food stands, Milek gave one last thought to the humans. It was something that they could not only survive, but thrive on a planet where they consumed toxic plants and lived next to dangerous predators. She counted herself lucky that they were friendly. She couldn't imagine what they'd be like if they decided to be hostile. Milek was sitting in a wide grassy field on her home world with Emily, her 2 children, and those 2 brutish animals called dogs. The King Charles Spaniel was content walking around, smelling various plants, rocks, and anything else it could place its nose against. The gigantic one, the Irish Wolfhound, was curled up and fast asleep. The 2 children were using the Wolfhound as a pillow, and were also taking a nap in the comfortably warm air. Milek tilted a rocking basket in a gentle rhythm that held 4 spun white cocoons. Her children had just exited the larval phase of their development, and would now spend the next few months developing in the safety of their silken homes. It has been nearly a decade since the humans came onto the galactic stage, and Milik was becoming more accustomed to their strange animals. She snorted at the memory of first seeing Arthur and his King Charles Spaniel. She and Fessin were so terrified that the pair of them froze up. Now she was becoming accustomed to the smaller animal. The dog, compared to the various creatures that the humans had a knack for demonstrating at the Intragalactic Pet and Garden Show, had become harmless in Milik's eyes. As for the Irish wolfhound, Emily explained that the animal was nearing the end of its natural life, and was considered elderly for the animal. The advances in longevity humans had discovered for themselves hadn't filtered down to their pets. Knowing how the humans love their animals, this wouldn't be a deficiency for much longer. The broader galactic community was also becoming accustomed to the strange new species that joined their ranks. After a boost in popularity when the humans came to the scene, the IPGS had begun to decline back down to its usual attendance. The floating space station, once needed to accommodate the 2 million attendants that had arrived by the 5th year, now felt cavernous now that the attendance had dropped down to 1 million. The upside was the regular crowds had become ardent followers, which moved the IPGS from an annual event to 4 times a year. Still, Milik knew it would only be a few more years before it returned to the normal 500,000 crowds. Even with the wild species that humanity had to showcase, there was only so much that could be displayed before it became dull again. Milik was fine with it. The crowds were becoming stifling, and the garden show was getting too big to sample everything without risking her stomach exploding. The novelty of humanity also wore off here, when they realized the garden show operated more like what they called a farmer's market, and ceased bringing dangerous plants. It didn't make much sense to transport begonias and water lilies, just for aliens to look at them. "Carrot?" Emily asked, as she handed a long orange root vegetable to Milik. Milik gripped it and crunched it in her mouth. The bright orange root was a wonderful treat. "Thanks. What is he doing?" Milik had gestured over to Arthur, standing a ways off in the field. He was whistling and clicking at 5 fluffy grey and white dogs. 2 of the animals had so much puffy hair that their eyes were obscured. Milik wondered how they could see. Emily had referred to them as Old English sheepdogs. They were bred to do something called herding. Milik had never heard it used as a verb before. She knew that humans consumed meat, so it made sense that they would develop a way to maneuver large populations of herbivores around, and needed a means to protect them from predators. Milik shuddered at the thought that the unassuming woman with blonde hair tied up in a bun was carnivorous. Had the Zillion people not developed intelligence, she could imagine the humans driving her people around with dogs. Emily had been polite and not brought along any meat on the picnic, much to the human children's dismay. Arthur was also not happy with the impromptu vegetarian day, which he tolerated with something he referred to as a stiff upper lip. "I understand the concept of herding, but why are you using it on an egeru? They're predatory animals," Milik commented. She was surprised at how calm she was in the presence of one of her planet's predatory species. The Zillions travelled in large herds, and evolved to their large size to protect themselves from the animals. Yet here was Arthur and his 5 Old English sheepdogs driving 4 of the egerus around the grassland. The reason they were doing this was the year before, the human family had come to visit Milik and decided to go on a safari, which meant driving a vehicle through the wilds and looking at dangerous beasts. Unfortunately, the egerus were also mildly endangered. The humans had to get special permission from the Zillion authorities to evaluate the animals. They were going to evaluate how to create a breeding program to improve their numbers, something the Zillions recognized only humans were crazy enough to do. No one else wanted to get near the dangerous animals. At least dangerous to Milik. The prior year on their holiday, Emily squealed loudly and called the egerus cute. Arthur, having observed the small family dynamic of the predators, thought they could make a good candidate for selective breeding, which was another motivation for their trip. Milek's head nearly burst when he heard the humans say that the Zillions could have their own version of dogs in a few generations. Her mate, Kaini, was concerned about associating with the humans at all. Kaini didn't have any input on the matter, and Milek squashed it. After making plans with Arthur and Emily, who also took the opportunity to train some working dogs for a client, they returned the following year. Milek felt bad for the Agaris. While their volume was about 20% greater than the sheepdogs, the dogs had a substantial mass advantage. Earth's high gravity necessitated evolving significantly sturdier physiques. After some initial aggressive posturing, the dogs quickly asserted their dominance. The Agaris were unable to match either the physical strength or the coordinated intelligence of the dogs. "How are things going over there?" Emily shouted at Arthur. He had been running around for a solid hour at this point, something that astounded Milek. That was at the upper bound of how long a trained Zillion athlete could run. Arthur was only breathing moderately heavier than usual. "Oh, I'm terribly out of shape. I'm thinking we need to make a few more days of the week vegetarian," Arthur called back. The human kids jeered at the concept of taking meat off the menu more frequently. Milek shook her head. Arthur was complaining about being unhealthy, while already performing better than most of the runners in the galaxy. "Not that. How are the dogs and the... what was it called again?" Emily asked Milek. "Agaris," Milek replied. "Yes, those. How'd you evaluate them?" Emily called over to Arthur. Arthur's hand went up to the lower part of his head, the part under the mouth they called a chin. "Promising. The dogs are all showing excellent herding instincts. We shouldn't let them get too used to this low gravity, though." His eyes tracked the Agaris, which were now huddled in submission between a circle of the panting dogs. The tongue flopping out from the sharp teeth was, as Milek learned, not a means of intimidation but of cooling down. Not that the Agaris knew the difference. "I think these creatures show promise as well," Arthur commented, when he peered at the predatory animals. Milek's mind thought to Fessin. She had met Fessin through Kaini's work. Unfortunately for Fessin, he and Kaini were off on a job constructing a space station in Earth's orbit to provide embassies for various galactic races. They couldn't survive on the planet, so a special arrangement had to be made. It was unfortunate, because Milek just observed another one of the human's strange behaviors, something she knew Fessin would have loved to witness. Arthur began to approach the Agaris slowly, bent over with the back of his hand presented. Fear rose up in Milek as she watched the human creeping towards the predators. She wanted to collect her offspring's cocoons and retreat back to their vehicle for safety. Yet Emily, their 2 children, and the 2 other dogs showed no signs of distress or concern. Because of this, she decided that Arthur must not be in any real danger. Not that it would quiet down Milek's own instincts. "Are you sure this is safe?" Milek asked Emily. Emily shrugged. "As safe as anything gets. Have to take chances to get a reward. Arthur has a way with animals, especially dogs that show aggression." If the creeping man in the outfit his human compatriots considered dorky is able to face down an aggressive dog, then the Agaris shouldn't pose much of a risk at all. The Agaris huddled closer when Arthur approached. The largest, the family matriarch, let out a low growl to warn the human away. He cooed at the sound, and commented how cute it sounded. The matriarch then suddenly lunged at Arthur. Milek froze in terror, thinking she had just witnessed the end of her friend. Instead, Arthur responded with reflexes that made the Agaru look like thick adhesive dripping down a wall. His powerful hands, surprisingly gentle, readjusted the lunge off to the side. The human then pinned the Agaru down and, to Milek's shock, flipped it over on its back. The Agaru tried to thrash and escape Arthur's grasp. The human had pinned the animal to the ground in a firm yet surprisingly gentle grip. The predator struggled to throw off the man's fleshy shackles. All the while, Arthur was using his other hand and gently stroking the Agaru's underside. After a few minutes, under the terrified gaze of its mate and offspring, the Agro began to calm. Arthur was making a gentle hissing noise with his mouth, which Milek found oddly soothing. Soon, the predator animal ceased thrashing and went still, his breathing beginning to calm. After the animal ceased fighting, Arthur released it and backed away. The Agero matriarch calmly flipped over to its legs, and then backed away from Arthur, keeping an eye on him. While it still didn't look friendly, the animal didn't show aggression. It had enough faculties to recognize the human wasn't something to trifle with. Emily smiled at the interaction. "Ah, that's promising." "That? The Agrarians look terrified," Milek said, as she watched the shaking animal stare at Arthur, no longer showing any behavior she was used to seeing in the predatory animals. "Of course, we can at the very least ensure a proper breeding program with that behavior," Emily replied. "Had they immediately fled or attacked after Arthur's show of dominance, we would have had to come up with a different plan." Milek processed the words as she watched the dogs, upon invitation from Arthur, approach the Agreros. The dogs were smelling the huddled animals, something she had recognized as a sign of friendly curiosity. With the dogs no longer showing their herding behavior, the Agreros, to Milek's shock, started to calm. "Does this mean they're tamed?" Milek asked, as she watched Arthur again close in and carefully inspect the Agreros, running his hand over parts of their body. Emily laughed musically. "Oh no, not in the slightest. I wouldn't suggest you go over there. At this stage they show all the signs of recognizing Arthur and the dogs as something they can't fight. Taming is harder, and even then, we still wouldn't want Zillions anywhere near one. That would be after we domesticate them, which is a rather lengthy process." "So what now?" Milek asked, starting up the rocking of her cocoons that she realized had stopped during the fascination with Arthur's actions. "We are going to request some land and set up a breeding facility. Then we'll go out and find more Agreros with similar temperament. We need to isolate and amplify the temperament genes needed for domestication without causing significant inbreeding. We lost a few breeds like the German Shepherd and the French Bulldog to poor genetic management," Emily explained, a slight sadness in her voice when mentioning the last two dog breeds. "Do you know how long it will take?" Milek asked, as she observed Arthur applying a local anesthetic to the Agrero's ears before clipping a tracking device to it. They had the system set up to track candidate animals, should they be needed for capture, after the facility was completed. Emily crossed her arms and looked at the sky. "Oh, hard to tell, really. It depends on how fast we can isolate the gene. There's no guaranteed domestication will even work. Still, the upside is we can at least produce a healthy population of Agreros that will pose lower risk to the Zillions when we're finished." Arthur, finished with tagging the Agreros, let out a shrill whistle. The 5 sheepdogs obediently converged on him as he walked away from the Agrero family. After a distance, the Agreros realized they were freed from their ordeal and slinked away in silence. "We had a few victories today. We have a beginning of a good candidate for Agrero breeding, and even better, these 5 are coming along nicely. I'll get them trained up on some sheep, and our client will have some excellent working dogs," Arthur said with a clap of his hands, the sharp sound dissipating in the grassland. Emily stood and stretched her back. "Unless you have any objections, Milek, I think we'll call it a day." "None at all," Milek replied, as she pressed a few buttons on her cocoon's basket. When the anti-gravity unit was activated, she prepared to move her offspring back to the vehicle to bring home. "It was an interesting day." "Quite," Arthur replied. "It's a shame Fessin wasn't able to come. He would have loved to see this." Milek was sure he would have. He would have also requested Arthur to visit his planet to see if there were any predators that he could test as well. As the human children and the other 2 dogs made their way to the vehicle, Milek took one last turn and looked over the grassland at the forms of the retreating Agreros. It was hard to believe that there was a chance that, someday in the future, those animals could be domesticated. That her children or grandchildren could lounge against a tamed Agrero, safe in the knowledge their pet would keep them safe. Milek also imagined the humans going around the galaxy, taming and domesticating even more of these animals. Interest in the IPGS may be waning now, yet Milik suspected there would be a new resurgence of attendees when the other species began showing off their newly domesticated homeworld predators. The human impact on her favorite pastime was not yet over.